I can't help it. Every time I hear somebody say a reading from the book of Jeremiah, I always want to jump in and say, who was not a bullfrog? In the name of God, who is love, beloved, and love overflowing. Amen. One of the key quotes from Mother Teresa, one of my all-time favorite saints, is when she said something to the effect of, we cannot do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Love that quote. That's the very first thing that came to my mind when I read today's tiny little gospel passage. Because if the disciples had worried about doing great things when they were first sent out as evangelists, oh my gosh, they would have at least hesitated, never mind felt dreadfully nervous, I'm sure, and possibly even backed out. But as Mother Teresa would later say, they were not expected to do great things, only small things with great love, and to take their ministry one person, one household at a time. I mean, otherwise, a person could be overwhelmed without even stepping foot out the door. So as you may or may not remember, the 10th chapter of Matthew is the chapter where Jesus sends out the disciples out for their first experiential lesson in preaching the good news. And as you can imagine, I'm sure they were a bit nervous. They had to rely solely on divine providence. They had to trust so completely in God, as Jesus taught them, that they weren't even allowed to bring food or even what we would call today an overnight bag. And if that wasn't enough to make them a little nervous, I mean, you know, no protein bar, nothing in case you get hungry or something. Oof. If that wasn't enough, they even got warnings. Jesus said, I'm sending you out like sheep into the midst of wolves. I mean, if they weren't nervous before that, I think by that point they probably were. That remark would probably be enough to put them on edge. In the previous passage before today's gospel reading, Jesus gives the warning that the good news that they're going to preach will actually make some people angry. Sounds like an oxymoron, right? The good news making people angry. Even family members would turn on each other from this good news. So when Jesus goes on in today's passage, the disciples have come to the conclusion that as exciting as it all was, it wasn't all going to be peaches and cream. They will encounter resistance. So the scene continues with today's passage where he says, whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. Well, then somebody must have asked, look, if we stick our neck out for you, what do we get? Somebody had to have asked that, or he wouldn't have said what he said. Because he says, whoever welcomes a prophet in the name of a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. Well, considering the history of how the prophets were treated, that's not really something that I'm sure lifted them up. I'm sure that made them even more nervous. What was the prophet's reward? They were hated. Prophets were hated. They were thought of as kind of nutballs, frankly. So it wasn't as comforting a passage as we might think. If the disciples were going to announce the reign of God coming upon the world in a new way, which would cause persecutions even among family members, there would have to be some kind of reward or at least an incentive to make sticking their necks out worth it. But the reality was and is that the reward for anybody's fidelity to the gospel is not always received in terrific ways. It certainly isn't always received in worldly ways, because like the kingdom, the rewards are not of this world. As in the case for most reformers, whether in secular or in religious circles, Change scares people, very easily known. And when people get scared, they lash out. If you look at the writing of the major prophets, it's pretty clear. That's why Jeremiah got thrown down a well or cistern. They did not like the change that he was begging the people to create. The Native Americans also know this pattern of behavior with human beings as well. There's a Native American musical I would love to show you, and perhaps I will in November. It's called Spirit the Seventh Fire. And it's the story of one Native American man's struggle to connect to his past by finding some kind of balance between his pursuit of the American dream and all of its trappings and his roots. And at one point, Chief Hawk Pope, who narrates the story, says, "If you do not walk with the animals, you will not know them. And what you do not know, you will fear. And what you fear, you will destroy." I think that's pretty clear that this is an ingrained human pattern. Fear creates all kinds of possibilities for harm, and it's a tactic that's been used on both sides of the political aisle. All this is to say that the risk the disciples took was no small matter. Another important message that this passage speaks about is the ministry of hospitality. All through my vocation to serve God as an ordained person, there have been many, many times when I was trying to get something done, whether it was a newsletter article, a sermon, preparing for a midweek service or a visit, and inevitably, I got so much more work done at home than I ever did in the office because there were so many interruptions, whether it was office machinery breaking down or usually tons of visitors just coming in to say hi or needing to talk about something they were upset about. And so the lesson I learned a long time ago is that dealing with people is always an opportunity to share the ministry of hospitality, whether one is in an office setting or at home with family or friends. It's almost always an opportunity to practice putting our faith in action. So we often say in ministry circles that the ministry is in the interruptions. Sometimes it's as easy as dropping a project you're doing, and other times it's as difficult as welcoming a stranger into a Bible study, as the folks did at Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church on June 17th, 2015, when a white supremacist boy named Dylan Roof opened fire in response to hospitality, killing 9 people and wounding 5 others. As far as I'm concerned, those people were martyrs. They were living their faith by welcoming that boy. As some of you know by the pictures I posted on Facebook, I decided on a whim to drive down to Mepkin Abbey, a Roman Catholic cloistered monastery, yesterday. And my reason was twofold. I have a friend there who I wanted to visit before I head out for vacation. And this person is in the discernment process for becoming a full-time monk there. So I wanted to visit him. And I've never been there, so I wanted to see what it was like. Of course, I picked the hottest day, to do it, but it was still worth it. As many of you know, while I have a wicked sense of humor, I definitely have the heart of a contemplative monk. It's just the way I've been for years. That's how I live. My prayer life is numero uno. My meditation life, reading nothing but books on spirituality, that is my life. So Mepkin Abbey is sort of a kind of a home away from home, so to speak. Most monasteries are to me. And this particular abbey is known as Trappist. They follow the rule of Saint Benedict, and therefore their motto is Ora et Labora, which means pray and work. That's their motto. Or as one of my teachers, James Finley, used to say, he was in the monastery with Thomas Merton in the Abbey of Gethsemane for years. And he said sometimes it was ora et labora and zamora. Because they really were expected to work hard and then pray, even getting up at 3 a.m. for prayer, and then go back to sleep to wake up again at 6 for more prayer. So Trappist monasteries all follow the same strict schedule that always keeps them busy around the clock. But in addition to that, monks are also expected to farm, in some way care for the property, and also in terms of feeding themselves. That's why a lot of them produce vegetables, cheese, milk, even bread. I know when Thomas Merton was in the monastery, they had pigs. So a lot of work, really. And all that is to say that Benedictine monasteries all have a kind of rule of life, which also includes the practice of the ministry of hospitality. They are required to receive guests as Christ, and it's considered a form of worship. And as Joan Chittister, a fairly well-known author, Benedictine nun, has said, the message to the stranger is clear. Come right in and disturb your perfect lives. You are the Christ for us today. It's a good thing to remember. She says, Benedict wants us to let down the barriers of our hearts so that this generation does not miss accompanying the innocent to Calvary as the last one did. Benedict wants us to let down the barriers of our souls so that the God of the unexpected can come in. And this is why it's a running joke in church circles, particularly in ordained circles, that the minute you try to do anything different, the first thing you hear is, but this is the way we've always done it. Now, with our little church, it's different. It's because we're really starting fresh. But in most churches across the board denominationally, this is the way we've always done it. Change frightens people. So then what will be our response? We do obviously take some precautions when we have our book studies here at night in the fall and the winter. We do lock the door when after everyone's arrived. I mean, that's just basic safety stuff, you know. So we're called to be welcoming and open our hearts to visitors, but we are also allowed to take some basic precautions. But here, and what I love about St. Catherine's is we really do welcome the stranger. We welcome anybody who walks through those doors, regardless of race, creed, color, politics, whatever. If you're here to worship and you are open, then you're welcome. And that's something that I'm very proud of about St. Catherine's. So really, it's as simple as that, the ministry of hospitality, that we train ourselves, we practice, not getting so stuck in grooves that we can't be open to the change that strangers will inevitably bring. We have to create new, how do we call this now? Oh, I hate it when this is why I write my sermons down, because I can't think of the words. Neural pathways. You know, we all have neural pathways. We get into a groove, we get into a pattern of behavior, and it becomes well worn, you know. But in faith, you know, in our faith communities, those neural pathways have to be way more flexible than normally we experience, because we are always welcoming a new person. And with new people comes new ideas. And again, we create new neural pathways. So perhaps Abraham and Sarah are good icons for this ministry of hospitality, because if you remember, you know, they were minding their own business, living their lives, and 3 people come and visit them. 3 men is the way they put it. And they feed them and take care of them, and they turn out to be angels who proclaim that they're going to have kids. I'm not sure how good that news is when you're in your 90s, but but they're going to be the father and mother of generations. And so this is one of our vocations as well, not necessarily to have kids at that age, but to put our faith into action by welcoming the stranger, welcoming each person as Christ, as Benedict would say. And so this, I think, is today's message for us, that we are called by Christ to trust in God's love no matter what we're going through, no matter how good or bad our day is, and to welcome the people as Christ himself. There's a lesson that each person has to teach us, and that we may even teach others and don't even know about it. It's probably even better that we don't know about it, otherwise our ego gets inflated. So this is what the writer in the book of Hebrews talked about. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some have entertained angels without knowing it. So that's our calling when we forget and somebody new comes in with new ideas. Could be an angel, you never know. Amen.